So ideal scenario for me is that this is something that we plan for like 2 years. And then the actual process itself usually takes on average about 6 to 8 months. So nothing like selling a house, nothing like the housing market. It really is. It's a lot, and it's a roller coaster.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Female Empowered. I am your host, Krista Gurka, and I'm just going to preface this by saying my dog Duncan, as you all have known, is really on high alert today, and he will probably bark several times throughout. So I'm just going to preface that. Just be prepared. I'm really excited for today's conversation. We have Mitch McGinley joining us, and we're going to talk all things selling and even setting up to sell, because maybe you don't know what your exit strategy is. People used to ask me this all the time, by the way, what's your exit strategy? And I was like, dude, I don't freaking fucking know what I'm going to do tomorrow, let alone like 5 years from now. And I didn't even really understand what that meant, exit strategy. And so I met Mitch at the Boutique Fitness Summit, which most of you saw me posting all about. And he was on by the way, we had our mastermind meeting last week and they asked us what they thought our favorite panel was. And you were my favorite panel. And I said specifically because I'm like a nuts and bolts kind of girl. So like, I thought you were, the whole panel I really thought was like very tangible to all businesses there. And so that to me was, I walked away, was like, I really learned something with this. And I sought you out and I was like, I would love to have you on my podcast so you could share all this information. So I'm really excited to have you. I'm going to read a little bit about your background, and I'm going to kind of just let you give your own personal version of this. So Mitch McGinley, your business is called Boutique Fitness. Is that correct?
It is.
Yes. Okay, good. All right. So you started your career in hotel management for Omni Hotels. We actually have Omni in Miami, although I don't know if it's Omni anymore. I remember that was like something when I was really young. The Omni Hotel was a big deal to go down there. So, and then a couple of years in, you started, and I remember the story from Boutique Fitness. You were the owner of a yoga studio. No, wait. The owner of your favorite yoga studio called you and told you that she wanted to sell, and the timing was perfect. So you really decided to quit your job, which is insane, right? And start on this journey. So proud to say that 6 years later, you actually sold your studio for almost 5 times what you bought it. That's amazing. You and you finished your MBA. I love it. That's so exciting. So why don't you kind of I'm kind of like butchering this because I can't read and talk at the same time. So why don't you kind of give your story? Because I think that it'll be like a much better version of than me just listening to it. So go ahead and share with us your journey.
I will, and I appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here also. I love your podcast. I love the female empowerment theme, baseline brand for all of it. But yeah, I got into this, I think, in a very relatable way that a lot of people do. They have some corporate career that they're working on, and then they realize one day that they don't want to be in that corporate career anymore, and they want to own a boutique fitness studio. For us, it was yoga. My wife and I, it was like one of our first dates was going to yoga class together. And we just kept doing it forever and ever. And she's a phenomenal teacher, among many other things. Her name is Carson with a K. And one day, the owner of our favorite studio just called us up and said, "Hey, I'm ready to sell, and I would love to sell to you." And we both were like, because we had always wanted to do it, but we didn't want to like start one and compete with her and all that. So it ended up being like 3 months of negotiating. It was really intense. It pretty much destroyed our relationship with that person because she wanted a lot more than we were willing to pay. And then we ended up making it work, and we owned that studio for 6 years. And somewhere along the way, I got kind of bored and felt like I needed a new challenge. And Our mutual friend, Laura Monkholm, was talking to me one day, and Laura is the founder of Walla now. And she was like, you should be a consultant. Like, you'd be great at this stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. She's like, do the little program at MindBody. And so I did the 6-month MindBody program where they stamp their stamp of approval on you as a certified business consultant, and helped studio owners all over the world with things like pricing strategies and sales funnels. And that was really fun. But I also realized I wasn't a very good consultant. I was really bad at charging people. I always felt guilty about charging people. And so when we decided to sell our studio after 6 years, we were just kind of tired. We were ready to move on. And I had some experience doing that. I had worked with somebody who was buying and selling hotels. And so ultimately knew what we wanted to do, was able to make it work with a friend / competitor who wanted to grow and expand into a second location. And all the while, the company that I work for now, which is First Choice Business Brokers, was asking me to sell my studio for me. And I was like, no, I think I got it. Like, I've got a buyer. I know what I'm doing. And fortunately, it all worked out. But when it did, they reached out again, and they were like, well, what are you going to do now? And I laughed at them, and I was like, I'm going to go on vacation. Like, I just sold my studio and got the biggest check I've ever gotten in my life. They were like, great. Well, when you get back, send us your resume. We think you'd be great at this. And it ended up just being perfect. I completely fell in love with the people that I work with. It's a lot like being a real estate agent, but for small businesses. And I just merged my worlds to be the guy who helps studio and gym owners sell. And I've been doing it for 3 years now, and it's obviously been a really, really difficult 3 years, but we've made it through it together. And I'm excited to see lots of things looking up. I'm optimistic about the rest of this year, and I'm excited to help some people, plan their exit so that they get their biggest payday one day, because that's really what it should be, is your biggest payday.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And so very, very interesting. So Laura was on this podcast, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about Walla, and we were also talking about how we had never actually officially, like, we had run in the same circles and with MindBody and all this stuff, and then like just chatting, we ended up chatting for like an hour and a half. It was really great. So and so if you guys want to go back to that episode, I can't remember what episode it was, but she is a co-founder of a new software that's called Walla, and it's really amazing. And so if you want to check out that episode, I've referred a bunch of people to it already. So, and then have you ever read the book, The E-Myth Revisited?
Yes.
Okay. So when you were talking a little bit in the, about your journey, I was thinking we kind of like jumped into it. I was like, he describes it as an entrepreneurial seizure, and in his book. And I think so many of us are like that, because with the exception of a few people now that I've actually met through my masterminds at Boutique Fitness, most of us were technicians when we went into our business. So we were the Pilates instructor or the physical therapist or the yoga instructor. And then we just were like, oh, I think I can do this myself. And so he calls it like an entrepreneurial seizure. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur, because I never really thought this would happen. So it kind of reminded me of that. And you turned around and sold within how many years did you say? 6 years?
6.
Yeah. So I relate to that, like wanting another challenge. I think sometimes as entrepreneurs and visionaries, like that's kind of, we're ready just for the next thing. And I'm really excited to dive into this information now of whether, I also am a big believer in, you can have a different thing as an entrepreneur, like even within your own business, you can do different revenue streams. A lot of people are talking about that now. Omni-channel, which means just like have a bunch of different, it's a fancy word for just have more than one revenue stream. But if people are ready to be done, like maybe there's a different life circumstance. Also, we saw this a lot during the pandemic, people moving, right? Their spouses or partners got relocated, or maybe they just decided, you know what, we're out of Manhattan, and running a business in person is really difficult. Running a business from afar is even more difficult. So it's sometimes that can happen. So I have a lot of questions. And I also have crazy ADHD, so I get all over the place. But my first question to you, which I do think was a very, very good point that you made in your presentation, was this is a process. So let's talk about that. This is not something you wake up today and you say, I'm going to call you and I'm going to say, hey, Mitch, I'm ready to sell my business. So like, can we close in 30 days? Right? So like, let's give people what they should realistically expect if they're thinking of selling their business.
So ideal scenario for me is that this is something that we plan for like 2 years. And then the actual process itself usually takes on average about 6 to 8 months. So nothing like selling a house, nothing like the housing market. It really is. It's a lot, and it's a roller coaster for sure. You know, the emotional attachment that people have to their businesses, it's their babies, you know, that they a lot of times birthed and grew and fed and, you know, blood, sweat, and tears and all of it, without enough gratitude or appreciation. Like there's a lot of parallels there. So, you know, to let go of something like that is very difficult just by itself. To have someone else come on and, you know, critique it and point out all the things that are wrong with it and tell you that they don't think it's worth what you think it's worth is all very difficult to do. And that's where somebody like me can play a hugely helpful role in making something like this happen. Is the number one thing that I do is therapy. Like 90% of what I do is being a therapist, which is to say that.
Then, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm curious then if you feel that because you bought your studio for someone else, do you think it was easier for you to sell 6 years later than had you like birthed it?
Yeah, for sure.
From an emotional perspective, right?
Absolutely.
Probably. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you were saying like, definitely therapy. I agree with that. And I think that it's one of the biggest things that we tell people. I mean, when I was going through a partnership dissolution, gosh, like 3 or 4 years into my business, my attorney kept saying, do you want to be right or do you want to be done? Because the only person that's going to make money in this is myself as the attorney. If you don't reconcile with, you are not going, if you want to be right, this is going to drag on forever and you're never going to get what you want anyways. So I would imagine that it's similar, whereas owners, especially when they birth something, they're saying, well, my client list is worth so much. And you kind of have to come with them, like, right, with like kind of like soothing strokes and say, yeah.
I'm the first person usually to disappoint them on some level. And that's, so to clarify, my role as a broker, it's different than that of an attorney or a real estate agent, in that I usually end up working for both sides in a deal. And so I'll work with the seller to prep their business and tell them what I think, you know, what I think the right price or the right asking price would be. And then, you know, they have to agree to that. And if they don't agree to that, then I don't work with them. It's not a good fit because we don't see eye to eye, and that's never a good way to start. So, you know, the next thing is listing everything. And, you know, once people start asking questions about it, when they sign an NDA, so long as they're not represented by somebody else, I have them sign something saying that they'll recognize me as the only broker in the deal. And then that just puts me squarely in the middle, where I'm meant to be a messenger. You know, someone who can help both sides understand what their options are. It's easy for me to be consistent and honest and just say, you know, here's how I see this. And I can say that to both sides, which is how I like to be. Like I love attorneys. I could never be one. You know, it's just for me, like I'm too much of I want to negotiate. I want to fix things. I want to make it right so that we can just move forward and get things done. You know, and it's like you're saying, like digging in your heels about stuff just doesn't get things done. And so that's the difference in my role. So a lot of times I'll absorb all the emotional parts from one side, listen really well, soak it up, make sure that person feels heard and validated and, you know, that there's empathy there. And then I will turn and communicate what needs to be communicated, which oftentimes could be very different, and then do the same thing for that side.
Yeah. Do you just have like a plethora of sage around you then that you can just like burn off like the bad juju of feelings? Because I can imagine it can be, someone explained it to me one time. She sold her studio and she said it was almost like a death to me. And she's like, I don't want to simplify that, but she's like, I really had to mourn the loss of like something that I built forever. And she was somebody that had moved away. She had moved to a different country. And she was like, I cannot, I thought I could, but I couldn't. And she's like, that's the first thing she told me. She's like, if you're ever thinking of selling, you just have to come to terms with like, you're going to have to like have this process where you're going to cry. Yeah. There's definitely going to be tears, I'm sure. So in preparing for the 2 years of prep time, right? What are some of the things that what does that prep time look like? Like, what should we as business owners, if we're thinking of selling, be preparing?
It's a great question. Thank you. There are like 3 main things. Number 1 is you have to get all of your finances in order. You need to have clean accounting. Do your best not to run every personal expense through your business. Trust me, I've been there. It's why we own small businesses. You can write everything in the moon off on your taxes, but that comes back to bite you when you're trying to sell. And the main reason is that for someone to get a loan to purchase your business, the only real loan that exists is an SBA loan. And that's a government-backed loan. And it means that it's very like red tape, has to check specific boxes. And so they go off of the profit that you show on your tax returns. So if you don't show your profit on your tax returns, your buyer is not going to be able to get a loan. And that is going to make it much more difficult to sell your business. So increase your bottom line as much as possible, show it on your tax return, and start to delegate as much as you can so that you are not the key to everything in your business. Because if you do absolutely everything for your business, you're going to be impossible to replace. Yep. And then the buyer is going to have to step in and do everything that you do. And if you can imagine trying to hire that person, that would be virtually impossible. And then you're trying to hire that person and convince them to give you a bunch of money.
Right. Yes. So true. In response to like the whole like cleaning your books, a lot of people ask us that too, especially small business owners, like, oh, what can I run through my business? Can I do my car? Can I do this? Like, first of all, it's your business. You can, as long as you're doing things relatively legally, you can do almost whatever you want. You talk to your accountant or your bookkeeper. And by the way, I always go back to that Schitt's Creek, like, thing where he's like, it's a write-off. Who pays for it? The government, I don't know, the write-off people. When we write something off, it's only like a portion. So you can write, for example, if you put meals on there, right? And if we went out to lunch, I could write it off as a business expense. There's a portion that you can write off. It's not like every single meal you ever eat means you don't pay for it anymore. So like, what I try to tell people sometimes is if you keep your personal expenses clean or as little as possible, like I have my cell phone on my business account, but I use my cell phone all the time for work. I do shoot video through there. I do whatever. I like to tell people sometimes you can also pay yourself more, right? You can give yourself more of a salary and then pay your car through the higher salary you're giving yourself. So sometimes that just looks cleaner on your books, right? But I'm not an accountant, people. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a business broker. I'm just saying there's more than one ways to skin a cat, so to speak, and you should just have these conversations with your accountant. But for sure, what Mitch is saying is you got to clean up your books so that the buyer, because the buyer is going to ask for you have to be completely open, like, clean, you got to show everything, right? So what about, okay, so I'm just going to throw it out there. Like, what about cash, transactions? So we don't get a ton of cash transactions, I would say, in our industry because we do sell things for a higher price point. But there are people that probably get cash and maybe don't record it on their books. And like, what do we want to tell people about cash? If it's not in your books, it doesn't look like you're having that as a sale. So can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And no one will believe you that it exists. So you have to show it. It has to be deposited into, it has to be recorded in your point of sale system and deposited into your bank account. And then your top line revenue will be higher and your bottom line profit will be higher, and everyone will give you credit for that sale.
For that sale. Yeah. So I think a lot of people are like, go ahead, finish.
Well, so the where this all ends is that you get a multiple of that profit number. And that's the most normal way to do a valuation. And so if you just think of it in terms of like everything that you make as an owner, and that includes your salary, your owner's draw, like all of it, whatever, just add it all together and then multiply that number by 2 or 3, like the most common valuation method that there is. And so, independent studios that are in a rural area, don't have a huge buyer pool, much more likely to be towards that 2x number. A franchise studio in a dense urban area that can get an Sba loan, more likely to get 3, maybe 4, but that's ambitious, and I don't like to set people's expectations that high.
That's good though.
Really
that's a good, it's a icing on the cake if you can get over that. Okay, so now I have another question for you. Do people then reach out to you, even like they're like, hey, so if I said, Mitch, I'm thinking maybe, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, can we start looking at this process now, even if someone's not 100% sure when that sale is going to go through, but they want to make sure that over the next couple of years they're doing that? Like, how does that work for you as a broker? I mean, I know like what you're talking about, it's similar to real estate agents sometimes, that sales process could take a long time, especially if there's not a need for it. Like someone's like, I'm looking for my house and I'm not going to buy until I find like the perfect one. So do you have a long sales cycle? Do people reach out to you a couple years in advance?
They do. And one of the joys of how I handle that is that, usually it's really easy for me to give those couple of tidbits of advice. If someone really needs help cleaning up their books, I would refer them out to one of my colleagues who specializes in that, who is a bookkeeper, has a finance background. That's their consulting business, is helping with that. And that's great, because that's, I learned that I didn't love being a consultant because of that reason. And so that's easy for me to do. And so it's, I always, in terms of like how soon is too soon to think about it, I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's 7 or 8 habits of highly successful people. And, one of them is begin with the end in mind. And so it's really an important thing to think about from the very beginning. It's like, how am I going to exit? When? How does my lease play into this? Because you don't want to wait until your lease is about to expire. Like that sort of hamstrings your options in a couple different ways. Is it financial incentive? Like, do you want to hit a certain dollar amount? Is it timeline incentive? Like, is it because you've got a kid going to college and you want to spend that last year with them before they go? There's all kinds of reasons that people want to sell their business, and it's very normal. Like, a lot of times people are like, why would you sell a business if it's profitable? It's like, well, I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
I'm ready for a new challenge. And
it's time to move on.
If it all works out well, you get 3 times what you made last year, and then you've got a whole bunch of money and freedom, to figure out what's next. And so
what's the next step?
There's a few other things that I always recommend people do when they're anticipating selling. One of the other ones is what I call planting seeds. And that's essentially just like dropping little hints to people who you're close to, who you think would be good buyers, to let them know that you might be thinking about this. And that's how it worked. And, literally the same way the owner called us and she was like, I want to sell to you. We were like, us? Really? You want to sell to us? And you're so flattered by it. And it's a lot like, asking someone to do a teacher training in my experience. It's like they take it as a huge compliment, and you can deliver that news without giving anybody reason to panic. Like, hey, in the next couple of years, I'm going to be thinking about this because blah, 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 like whatever, don't worry about it. But like, I thought about you. And if you're interested, let me know. I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then you walk away and you let that seed grow into excitement that might allow for the right timing for them. And, with these studio sales, it's not like there's dozens and dozens of buyers banging down your door. For the most part, it's, you're usually lucky to get a couple offers.
Yeah.
More often than not, it's someone from within the community is the best, because they know the community, they know the people, they know the staff, they know the clients, they know you, they love and trust you as an owner. That's priceless. When somebody comes in off the street and doesn't know you, they think that you're trying to pull something over,
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to create that trust and respect for the community when it's somebody from the public. So that planting seeds thing is worked out time and time again for me. And it's always nice when I hear one, and it happens a couple times a year.
Yeah. I was going to ask you then, that kind of leads to my next question. So how many, or at least in your experience that you've worked with, how many of the sales have gone through that way? Like someone's reached out to a buyer and said, I'm interested in selling, and whether it be the first person they talk to, or whether it be eventually, I know I'd like to get into like how you could do it for your employees. How many of your sales have gone that way versus just putting it on, which we're going to talk about in a minute, like that, the broker kind of site?
Yeah, it usually ends up being both. We end up doing both a lot of times. So like I'll list them on the websites, and bizbuysell.com is the main one there. There's 7 or 8 different ones, but it's, we'll put it out there, and then I will also encourage my sellers to start talking to people.
Yeah.
Because of all those reasons we just said. And so it's helpful to be able to point those people who are interested towards a listing, so that it's real. It's like, yeah, it's really for sale. Here it is on this website. There's, and the website shows the asking price and the revenue and the profit. And it doesn't have detailed financials, but it's enough to give you like an idea of, how big is the space? What's the rent? Like all that stuff is just on the listing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's usually not on the listing is the name of the business.
Right.
It'd be like random Pilates studio in South Florida.
Yeah.
And that's.
Can I ask you like what, like some of the things that are included, because some of the stuff that's on them in certain, on the listing of Biz Buy Sell can be confusing. So like you said, there's usually it's annual revenue, right, that they have on there. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they have cash flow. Like when it has cash flow, like what are they actually talking about when they have cash flow on there?
That's such a great question. And the truth is that people define cash flow differently.
Yeah.
and so there's no way for me to answer this like perfectly for everyone, but here's what I take it to mean. Cash flow is, a lot of times we'll call it discretionary earnings or owner's draw. It's basically how much money the business makes when you take out all of the personal expenses that are not necessary for the operation of the business. So a couple of examples.
Say that again. So it's what the business makes. Is that what you said?
Yep.
When you take out all of the personal expenses.
Correct.
Okay. So you were going to say, like, yeah, let's
continuing education.
I got it.
Meals, you need one, but do you pay for your whole family's cell phone through your business? If so, we add back a piece of it. Travel is a big one. I mentioned continuing education because a lot of times that can be the most expensive one. Like that's the one that, for us, like everything that my wife uses to inspire herself goes under continuing education, and it ends up being a significant amount of money every year. Yeah. That's not, you could argue that that's necessary to run the business. Like I could certainly make that argument. but it's also personal development. And so I think it's easy enough to separate it out. It's different than something like EBITDA, which is earnings before interest.
Understands.
Yeah, I won't even go there. And it also can add back like one-time capital expenses. So for example, like, let's say you bought 4 new reformers this year. Those get depreciated on your balance sheet. You're not buying new reformers every single year, hopefully. Oh my gosh. And so those things can be added back because a buyer wouldn't have to then spend that money again next year. And so it gets a little wonky, and people look at it differently. And so, you can argue with anybody over what should be an add back and what shouldn't, but hopefully you're making a compelling argument to your buyer and they're buying it literally.
Right. So let me ask you this then about like adding back. So you'll hear a lot of people say like, oh, you can add back owner salary. Okay. So for example, I am an LLC that files as an S Corp, right? So for those of you that don't, this is always a confusing question for a lot of business owners. And for me, I literally had to save this email from my accountant because every year I'd go back and like revisit it because I didn't really understand what it meant. So basically what that means is that for everything flows through to my personal taxes. Okay. So for a long time, I was not paying myself a big salary and I was taking it as an owner's draw because I'll be honest, we were trying to get my kid into private school. And I was like, well, maybe if it shows that I don't make that much money, then I'll get a financial aid. Unfortunately, that bit me in the ass because then I wanted to get a line of credit for when we were expanding. And they're like, oh, but you make like $10,000 a year. So that doesn't work. So just FYI, people, don't give yourself financial advice, like ask an accountant. So when I pay myself a salary, okay, I have, like you said, like removed myself from the business, like day-to-day operations are really run by someone else. I don't teach as much anymore. So would when they say add owner salary back, I could technically say to the buyer, like, you can add my salary back in because you don't need me to run the business. Would that be correct? Or am I explaining it incorrectly?
No, that's correct. And truthfully, you can always add back the owner salary.
Oh, okay. Even if they're like considered, what if they're actually performing the services? So if they're like teaching and treating and all of that stuff.
It's a harder sell to a buyer and especially an investor, but the banks will still do it.
Oh,
and a lot of times that's the most important thing. And so most people are LLCs taxed as S Corps. That is the most common setup that I work with. And so you're supposed to, that's one of the rules is you're supposed to pay yourself a small salary that's commensurate with what the level of work that you do is. A lot of people minimize that salary so that they pay less in payroll taxes. That's also very normal. But if you do everything under the sun for your business and you're paying yourself $20,000 a year, anyone who knows what they're doing is going to come in and look at that and be like, no, that's not right. And they might do a negative add back and be like, there needs to be another $50,000 of payroll in here that you deserve, but haven't been giving yourself. And so that's really common too. But the banks will still add it back, whatever it is, because presumably the buyer could also do what you do and make that money for themselves. And the banks are always concerned about the buyer being able to make money for themselves in addition to paying back the loan.
Yeah. So can we just use like hypothetical numbers for those people that are listening that are like, can you give me like a number valuation? So let's say that a business generates $1 million in revenue a year. Okay. So so that's your top line, right? $1 million in revenue. And then let's say that their net at the end of the year is like, let's just make it even. Let's say it's 10%. So it's $100,000 at the end of the year. Okay. And the owner pays, again, let's just make it even. Let's say the owner pays themselves $100,000. I like even numbers.
Makes it easier.
Yeah. So would the, let me just see if, well, maybe I shouldn't put words into your mouth. The way that I'm thinking about it is, and let's not make it complicated with like the continuing education and all that other stuff, but so if it's $100,000 net, right, at the end of the year, would you take then that $100,000 and add in the owner's salary as $100,000? And that would be what you want, what you get the multiple, is that
Yes.
okay, so
Yes.
$200,000 times, you said maybe 3, so that would mean $600,000 is what this company just superficially could list their business for.
That is correct.
Woohoo! I did the math really good. Not delving into anything super complicated.
Yeah. So if you pay yourself $100,000 salary and you make $100,000 in profit on top of that, you add those two together and multiply it by 3.
Yeah, perfect. And that's like where you would say, again, super superficially, you start at this, like, this is a starting point. Now there's like negotiations, et cetera, that go with that. Is there, like, would a business owner come to you and say, listen, this is my bottom, like same thing with selling a house, like I'm not taking less than this. And if you think that that's reasonable, that's good, right? Like you would just say, okay, like we're not going to go less than this. And you're thinking the owner's reasonable. There's always a little wiggle room. They're not just digging their heels in. That, like, you would just keep working until they got got that number, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it just takes several months for the right person to find the ad. Again, timing is everything. And so, it may be that, there are people who have filtered searches set up on Biz Buy Sell so that, when something new comes on the market, you can get an auto email. And so if you're interested in buying a Pilates studio, like, by all means, go on Biz Buy Sell and set up a saved search so that you get alerts when those come on. But there aren't many of those.
Yeah. So just
Nice.
For a total aside, FYI, my business model has been, I think this is like a good thing for people to recognize too. So obviously even now, like our business model was when we were ready to expand, right, and go, it's obviously within a reason. I have an auto email that goes out, like I have what I'm looking for, because the ramp up time, if I bought another business, is significantly less, right? So I'm buying their lease, I'm buying their studio, I'm buying their client list technically. Now I could come in and change the staff if I needed to, but I'm not starting from scratch. I'm not having to do a build out. So like I, can negotiate, we're going to pay this amount. And some people might say, oh, well, that's a lot of money. But if you think about, if I look for a space, I have to rent, first, last, security, whatever. You have to put a personal guarantee a lot of times now. You have to do a build out. You have to purchase all your new equipment, right? Which right now, at least Balance Body is running on like a year, 12 to 18 month back order. So like the ramp up time becomes much less. So just for this, a total aside, but if you're like, how can I grow? I just don't want to put that much work. It's like having a baby when they're like 5 instead of as an infant, so it's a great business model to go through if you can do it. And sometimes people need to get out for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people need to make a really quick turnaround for any number of reasons, right? And you can think of, these people are ready to be done. Let me give them something for their business that they're looking for. So when you talk, so Biz Buy Sell, guys, we'll link it up in the show notes, but Biz Buy Sell, it's also great to like see what else is out there. So, okay. So if I want, let's just say 600,000. Okay. What are the different options for transactions? So like, if we wanted to maybe sell it to employees or anybody that didn't have the capital to give you all 600,000, are there a variety of ways that, you could take a deposit and then work it off over a certain amount of years that you've negotiated?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. For the most part, everybody wants cash. Like that's everyone would, the preference would be to just write a check and cash it and be done. or better yet, just wire it to me in the Bahamas where I am. Yeah, but there's a few different things that we use that are really common. So, SBA loans are the best tool that's out there. There's a company out there called Apple Pie Capital that does conventional loans for a few specific franchises. And so if they're growing, but it's still very limited, but like the Exponential Brands and Bar3 are like the first ones that come to mind for me. But they'll actually do a conventional loan, which is way better than SBA, way better. So I've been trying to work with them a lot. They've been really wonderful. And then, the other tools in the tool chest are things like an earnout or a seller carry note. And so, seller carry note is essentially the seller acting like the bank and accepting a down payment, and then the rest of the payments in monthly installments over some period of time. So if it's our $600,000 studio, say they've only got 4, and so they give you a $400,000 payment, and then they pay you the other $200,000 in monthly installments over 24 months. And usually when we do that, there is interest that's attached to it. That'd be normal, like 5 or 6% right now. An earnout is very similar, except that it's tied to the performance of the business. And so earnouts can be really helpful when there's perhaps a disagreement about the projection of the business. And so coming out of COVID, like that's a normal conversation, because if the numbers aren't quite back, the buyer might be skeptical that the numbers will get back. And so you can make the deal in a way that, based on the gross revenue of 2023, if it's up, you get your full asking price. If it's down, you take a little bit less. Like, that's as loosely as I can explain that.
Yeah, that makes sense though.
But those are in the seller's control. And so, when a bank won't loan on your business, and you really want to sell, and you've got somebody that you believe in, it's a great tool to be able to offer your buyer or mentee or protege, whatever, whomever it is.
Especially if it's like someone that works with you. And I would imagine that there's a lot of studios that sell to their employees, or a manager, or maybe a client, someone really like in-house that wants to take over the business. And, they might not be able to get a loan for $600,000 or $500,000. So I think that's a good opportunity for say, like, you're passing the torch to someone that's worked for you for a long time and they want to rise up, right?
Yeah, it feels good. And usually, and they get paid back at a really high, like, very few people traditionally default on those seller carry notes in this space, because it's someone giving you that chance, and obviously COVID was different. And so there was some trauma there, because you do run the risk of, if for some crazy unexpected reason, the business has to shut down and it can't make any money, then there's no money to pay you with.
Right.
And that happened to a lot of people. So
yeah. So let's talk about, so we just did an example of someone whose business could sell for 600,000, right? Let's talk about the flip side. Okay. So let's talk about someone who is maybe a solopreneur. Maybe they have 1 or 2, they're very small. Like, let's talk about that. Cause I thought that was very, important. What you said at the summit was even like, you could do a flat asset sale, or maybe, someone could come in. You talked about this, like, if your lease is up, what are they actually buying? They're going to have to move. So you have to make sure that you can sell in your lease. So if you have 5 years on your lease, that's part of the deal and negotiations people are looking at. So what if someone is on a smaller scale, they're generating, $500,000 a year, and they just really want to walk away, but they don't want to walk away with nothing. What are their options?
Well, let me go all the way to the low end of it, so that the people who are generating $100,000 a year don't feel bad.
I love that. So, this is why I brought you on. See, you're so tangible.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of them, and it's
Yeah.
a lot of times like you're sitting in the room hearing about $80 million deals. You're like, what? But no, there's a lot of studios out there that do, $8, $9, $10,000 a month in gross revenue, and the owner might not make anything for themselves. It might make a little bit, it really depends on the rent. But let's put it this way: when you can't do the valuation based on the cash flow number because it's not positive or it's not large enough to make sense to do it that way, there's generally a floor for me. And I have found that floor to be around $50,000. And so to your point earlier about like, if you find a space to get it built out and to, hire staff and train them and, get to the point where you have 100 members or whatever it is, like that's hard to do. And so instead of spending $150,000, $200,000 on a build out that's going to take 12 or 18 months and then all new equipment, like it makes way more sense to buy a business that's in that scenario for 50. That's a screaming deal,
Yep. Yep.
And so it works out well because even if it's a different vertical, for example, a yoga studio could easily sell and become any other type of fitness studio. Somebody who wants to start a Pilates business could find a yoga studio that's for sale for $50,000 and buy it, and then just add the equipment and have it be ready to go still. Same for bar, cycle, anything like that. It's easier to convert those spaces. And so where I've had success is that $50,000 number. And so a lot of times we just put that out there to people, and sometimes it's just taking what you can get, but it's certainly better to get 25 or 30,000 for your business than nothing.
Yeah.
And nobody needs to know how much you sold your business for either. That's another thing that I always want to tell people is, it's a very private thing, and it's not like homes. It's, I don't go around and tell people how big the deals I close are, because it is so personal. And truthfully, like after you sell it, no one's going to care or ask, and so for a lot of times for my sellers, they'll be really sad about the number that they're getting. And it's like, look, I'm here to tell you, like, I wanted to get more too, but since being done, like I haven't regretted it for a second, for a single day. It's like, you will move on. You'll be proud that you sold it. That's all anybody needs to know. They don't need to know how much you sold it for. There's nothing to be ashamed of. You should be very proud of what you've created. And, you should be respected for managing to make it through COVID and building everything that you've made and living to tell the story.
Yeah, definitely. So last question I have for you: how do you as a broker get paid? Is it similar to a real estate agent? Like, does the seller pay you, the buyer pay you? Is it a percentage? Does it vary based on your deal?
It's a percentage. It's usually 10 to 12% total. 10% I feel like is very much the norm. There are a lot of brokers out there that charge more. I've never really felt comfortable doing that, but there's a few states that have special licensing requirements. And so you have to be licensed by the state. And so California is one of those states. So I'm licensed in California. There's only about 10 others, but if I want to do a deal in another one of those states, I have to find a broker in that state to do the paperwork for me. And so that's one scenario where I charge 12, because I then have to cut that person into the deal. But that's generally it.
The seller does. So you pay that other person from your fee if you have to cut them in. Got it.
Yeah.
Who else is involved? So I'm going to, and again, this is total assumption. There has to be an attorney involved, or no?
I always recommend that.
Okay. There should be an attorney involved, right? So that's something that the seller would have to pay for, right? What about
each side?
Each side, and then an accountant probably to look over documents, right? And so that would be like what they're paying for each person. I'm sure the accountant and the the attorneys for each side. And then anything else besides that, really?
No, that's really it. The only other thing that comes up is escrow, which
yeah.
is, just an entity that holds money, and depending on what state you're in, they do it differently, but not more than like $1,000 usually.
Oh yeah. Simple. So, well, this was super informative. I could keep asking you questions over and over and over again, because I just think it's a great topic to say, hey, let's put this out there. Like, it's a possibility, that you can have an exit strategy. I think a lot of people, one thing I think a lot of people in this business think of a huge exit strategy. So I think it's important to let's be realistic about what it is, which could still be huge. Listen, if you can sell your business for $500,000 to $1 million, I think that's amazing. And then on the flip side, even if you think I'm a, small, just me, you could still get out with some money, some financial return, which I think is great. That's why I think it was great to have you on. So let's tell everyone where they can find you, so that when all of these people are ready to cash out, you will have so much business you don't know what to do with yourself.
I appreciate it. My everything is Boutique Fitness Broker. And so my IG is Boutique Fitness Broker. My website is boutiquefitnessbroker.com. Please follow me on Instagram. I'm doing my best. It's not easy for me, but I'm working really hard on it.
Yeah, Instagram is I just recorded a reel right before this, and then it won't take my caption. And I was like, God, I have 30 seconds to put my caption in. Yeah, Instagram is a beast. But yes, we're going to link all of that up in the show notes. And then your website is boutiquefitnessbroker.com.
And my email is mitch@boutiquefitnessbroker.com.
And you're on LinkedIn also. You can check you out on LinkedIn also. So we're going to link all of that up in the show notes. If you have questions, you can even reach out to him, have him follow him on Instagram. Everyone's looking for more followers these days. Instagram's a bitch right now. And then reach out to him if you're curious. I know a lot of you have asked me questions about selling your business and what that looks like. So this is the person, and he has boutique fitness experience. He knows what it's like to run a studio. He knows what it's like to buy a studio. He knows what it's like to sell a studio. So he can speak your same language, understand your same, emotional connection to this. So I think it's going to be great. So I really hope you reach out, and I hope let's see if you get some more followers on there.
Please do. I'd really feel free to reach out. You're welcome to schedule time on my calendar. You can all do it through there. You don't need permission, just do it. And I'll look forward to talking.
I love it. Well, thank you, Mitch. I hope we bring you back again. Maybe we'll have one day, maybe I'll be one of your clients,
I hope so.
I know. I mentioned it to actually
send you on vacation for a little while.
I know. I mentioned it to one of my clients right when I got back. He is actually, he's in private equity. So we talk finances a lot. And I said, we had this great panel, and it was talking about selling and exit strategy, and I'm really excited. I'm going to bring him on the podcast. And his face just went. I was like, what? He's like, wait, are you selling? And I was like, no. He's like, okay. I was like, no, I'm not selling. Don't worry. And so I was like, but one day it's nice to know that I have someone nice now that I can go to, that I'll feel has my best interest at heart as well. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
No, my pleasure. And until next time, everyone, bye for now.